Hello and welcome to today's video lecture. Today we're going to talk about gaps analysis. A gaps analysis is a great way to break down the marketing situation that your client might be facing and to give structure to some of the answers that you might offer. As you can see on the screen right now, there are 5 gaps that we're going to talk about. I want to actually start by sort of giving an overview of what this picture looks like. Look at the very top. Expected service. This is what the customer expects to receive from its transaction with a vendor, with a firm, with a marketer. Look at the very bottom of the screen. Management perception of customer expectations. Does management know what its customers want? And now we can move from there. Actually, no, let's not move from there. Let's start right in the middle. Sort of in the middle. You see that dashed line. A little bit above the middle of the screen. That's the service counter. That's where the rubber meets the road. That's where the service is actually delivered. So now that we've got those 3 key points in mind, the customer at the top, the provider at the bottom, and the interaction a little above the middle, we can now look at the different gaps that we're going to analyze. And we'll look at each of these in more detail in just a moment. Start with gap number 1. That's really the first one we mentioned, and you can see that in the middle of your screen, but on the left-hand side of the table. The gap between what management thinks customers want and what customers actually do want. Back to the bottom, the second gap is what management thinks customers want and service quality specifications, and that is how does management articulate what they think their customers want? The next gap, gap 3, we're moving up the chart now, is between management's articulation, that is service quality specifications, and how the service is actually communicated to the frontline people, the people that deliver the service. So you can see now the bottom part starts at the very bottom, what management thinks customers want, move up to how management articulates those thoughts, and then move up from there to how management communicates those thoughts to the actual service delivery people. If you've worked in a retail setting, in a restaurant setting, I'm sure these are familiar to you. Now let's go to the right side of this chart, the gap between service delivery and communication with the customers. You'll see also that there's an arrow from the very bottom, management perception, to how it's communicated with the customers. The key here is what is the alignment between what the marketer is offering and how they share that information with their customers. Now, above that dotted line, you see that there's a gap, gap number 5, actually moving from the top back toward the middle. What customers expect to receive and what they actually receive. What they actually receive can be called personalized service. So there it is in visual form, and then on the left side of the screen you can see them listed, all 5 of these service gaps. The gap between consumer expectations and management's perception of those expectations, that's gap 1. Gap 2, between management's perception and the internally communicated specifications, how well management articulates their expectations. Gap 3, between the service quality specs, or the articulation, and the actual service delivery. Gap 4, that's off to the far right-hand side, between the service delivery and communications with the customers. And then finally, gap 5, between what customers expect and what they actually receive, or, as you can see here, think they receive. Now I'll show you some examples of each of the 5 gaps that we're talking about in our gaps analysis. I included a small, hard-to-read reproduction of the chart for you to refer to. Of course, you can always go back to the first slide. And now we're going to talk about gap 1, between what consumers expect and what management thinks consumers expect. And here are a couple of quick examples. First, we'll start with JCPenney. JCPenney had an interesting idea a year or so ago. It says actually 2012. And that is, they thought customers were tired of sales. They thought customers were tired of having expired coupons. They were tired of fighting the crowds. They were tired of going shopping just after a sale had ended. So Penny's response was, okay, we hear you. No more sales. We're going to keep prices low all the time, And then we'll have just a couple of tiers where prices can be reduced even more, either on a department-wide basis, or finally we'll have our clearance shelf, our bottom floor sales. It was really meant to simplify the pricing process to the benefit of the customers. Customers did not like that. To Penny's surprise, they discovered that customers, they like coupons. They like the thrill of the hunt. Not all of them, and maybe not the ones they spoke to, but JCPenney customers were very upset at their attempt to clarify the pricing process. And so Penny's retracted and went back to their previous model. One of the most famous examples is that of the new Coca-Cola. This is from now, my goodness, about 30 years ago, when Coke was losing the Pepsi challenge. Hey guys at Coca-Cola, that was a Pepsi marketing campaign. Of course you were losing that challenge. That's how Pepsi planned it. So Coca-Cola decided that we're going to change our flavor to be more like Pepsi, because after all, that's what that Pepsi-Cola research is telling us. What Coke didn't realize were a couple of things. One, people love Coca-Cola. They love the brand. They love the identity. They love being associated with it. They did not want Coke to be changed, certainly not against their will. Another thing, and we can certainly go into great detail about the Pepsi challenge and how that's not real marketing research, is that, some people like their cola a little sweeter. Those are called Pepsi drinkers. Most people like their cola not quite as sweet. That's why Coke was the marketing leader, despite the success of the Pepsi campaign. So Coca-Cola, again, went back on their tracks, brought out the new Coke Classic, and they're way back on top of the cola wars. A third example, a more recent vintage, is that of Lululemon, blaming customers for their product performance failure. Now, again, I'm not sure if this exactly fits into Gap 1, but let it just be a lesson that if the product's not working, don't blame the customer. Your choices are either to find new customers for whom the product will work, fix up your marketing communications, or fix the product. Looking now at gap number 2, the gap between management perception and internally communicated service quality specifications. Not to get all political on you, but there's been a lot of controversy about the effectiveness of Obamacare, and it really rose to a head a couple of weeks ago when the website was first made available and the website was universally frowned upon. It's pretty clear that the goal of the people that drafted Obamacare and the website blunders was not planned. And so a lot of times something falls in the communication. Management thinks one thing. It's clear in their mind, and certainly you've experienced this too. Something's perfectly clear in your mind. It's just hard to communicate it to the next person that has to get the message. And I think that's really an example of what happened with Obamacare. They didn't plan to make the website bad. And you've also certainly seen a lot of bad websites where the vision that that management had, that the marketer had, wasn't properly executed. So this is gap 2 between what the marketer wants to happen and how they communicate it to the people that have to make it happen. Following that process now is gap 3, the gap between the service quality specs, and that is the articulation of what management wants, what the marketer wants, and the actual service delivery. Now, somewhere upper management at Burger King probably had an idea in their head that they don't want their employees standing in the food, especially with shoes on. But as you can see from this picture, that message did not get communicated. It is very possible this is a gap 2 situation where management did not want the employees to stand in the food, and it never quite made it to the employee training manual. I have a feeling it's there now, or maybe just some general terms about not screwing around with the food that you're asking your customers to eat. But I'm using this as an example. One is a tribute to those of you who have worked in fast food and certainly have your own stories to tell. And the fact that, no, you should not do this. Don't spit on top of the cheeseburger, no matter how rude the customer is. Don't stand in the lettuce bin. There are rules that are created. There are procedures. There are protocols that are established from marketing management to the employees, and the employees have to follow them. The gap between the specs and the actual service delivery. Let me take a moment now to just sort of step back and ask you to think about how this applies to our client. Can you outline the path from the marketer's offering to the consumer's use of that offering by using the gaps analysis? Again, the chart is included here on this particular slide. And that is, what is our client's vision? What is it that they want to offer? How well do they make that desire and that offering come to life, to make it tangible? And then how well are the representatives of the marketer executing that vision? Now let's sort of glide along that dotted line that we saw before and talk about gap 4, the gap between service delivery and external communication. How well is our client letting their current and prospective customers know about the offering? Here I include a couple of examples. I'll start with the one at the bottom with Esurance. Not sure if this is the best gap that this fits into, but as you can see from the caption, Esurance had a mascot, a character that was working very well for them, that was popular, and the fans of the product, fans of the mascot, really adopted the mascot as their own and started parodying it, started really making it their own character. Well, in a great social marketing faux pas, Esurance couldn't handle that. They could not handle relinquishing control of their brand, and so they pulled the mascot away. Now, I guess in a sense this communicates on a more abstract level that we don't want to share our product with you. We want you to buy what we're selling, but we don't want you to have any more part of that. And in the current marketing paradigm, which is so dominated by social media marketing, you can't do that. You have to relinquish control to some extent of your offering to the customers and let them help make it better for you. That's the key. Another one that I found that I got a kick out of, see if you can notice why. The timeline posting by Oprah, gotta say, love that Surface, have bought 12 already for Christmas gifts. What is wrong with this picture? Did you notice that she sent that message not from a Surface, but from the Surface competitor, the iPad? What kind of message does that send? Now this is a case more of earned media than owned media, if you remember that conversation from a few weeks ago. But still, this is something that Surface should have been aware of, should have worked perhaps more closely with Oprah before she started praising their product by using the competitor's product. The next slide shows the final gap of our 5 gaps in our gaps analysis, the gap between the perceived or received service, that is, not just what does the consumer receive, but what do they think about what they received, and what they expected. So now we're at the top part of the gaps analysis chart. And we can see here a couple of examples between the customer expecting one thing but receiving something different. And I'm not just talking about lettuce with footprints on it. One example from recent times is Apple Maps. Apple had created something with the new version of their iPhone and had people's hopes very high for the performance of the map function, or the map app. But as you can see from the caption, it didn't work. And maybe that's a real simple way to state gap number 5. How well does the product work based on the promise, based on what customers expected? At the bottom, the Casa Sanchez tattoo, people expected that if they got a tattoo, they would get free food. But as you can see again from the caption, that they did not, because it was more popular than expected. That almost ties back to something I've talked about before when it comes to brainstorming, is that it's great to come up with new ideas, but you have to also think it through. What if your promotion is simply too successful? You do not want to let your customers down. You do not want to break your promise to your customers. That is gap number 5. And again, think of this in terms of our client. Do potential and current customers have expectations of their relationship with the client? If those expectations are wrong or unclear, that's a gap 4 situation in which the communication, the external communication, has been inadequate. If they do have expectations, but those properly aligned expectations, but they're not met, now we're into gap 5. How well can the marketer fulfill its promise? And that is your video lecture on gaps analysis. Your next exercise when it comes time for your deliverable for the class and for your client is to understand how well does the client perform on each of these 5 possible gaps. Are there any areas that are in dire need of improvement or even subtle need of improvement that'll help the marketer better deliver their offering to their customer? Thank you for your attention.